You can judge me if you want. God knows I've judged myself enough times for the both of us. I know what I did sounds wrong. On paper, it is wrong. A married woman. A younger man. A secret that lived between long silences and stolen glances. But see, people love to label things. Cheater. Homewrecker. Midlife crisis. What they don't love is looking past the label to ask why. Behind every mistake, there's a story. And mine? It began the day Liam walked into my house and, without even meaning to, flipped everything I thought I knew about myself upside down. It's funny. I used to think I was above this kind of story. You know? I used to hear stories like this, older woman, younger man, and roll my eyes. Desperate, I'd think. Sad. But the truth is, I wasn't desperate. I was numb. I was a woman who thought her best years were behind her. I was a wife who felt invisible in her own kitchen. A mother whose name had become synonymous with car rides, grocery lists, and forgotten dreams. I'd traded poetry for permission slips, desire for duty, and over time, I disappeared. And then Liam walked in, all boyish charm and bright eyes, helping my son with some school photography project, and he looked at me like I wasn't a ghost. He looked at me like I still existed. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, but as a woman. I didn't fall into an affair overnight. No. I fell in layers. Slowly, painfully, one conversation at a time. One glance held too long. One late-night text that I shouldn't have answered, but did. This is my story. My cheating confession. And no, it's not what you think. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't about youth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about feeling alive again. It was about remembering who I was before life swallowed me whole. Before routine became my religion. Before I started telling myself that wanting more made me ungrateful. What happens when your second chance at happiness comes at the cost of everything else? Your family, your identity, your peace. Would you take it? Would you even recognize it if it came wrapped in the smile of someone 15 years younger? This isn't a story about a perfect love. It's about a real one. A messy one. The kind that starts with loneliness and ends with consequences. So, if you're here to hear the truth, not the sanitized version, not the moral of the story, then pour yourself a glass of wine, sit with me for a while, and let me tell you about the man who didn't just break the rules. He taught me how to live again. His name was Liam, and this is how it started. My life was quiet, predictable, safe, if I'm being generous, stagnant, if I'm being honest. I was 44, married for 19 years to a good man, a dependable man. He never raised his voice, never cheated, never forgot to take the trash out. But somewhere along the line, he stopped seeing me. We talked, sure, about bills, about the kids, about what to have for dinner. But it had been years since he looked at me like I was more than a fixture in our home. Like I was anything but someone who used to have her own life. Once upon a time, I was a writer. Novels, short stories, little essays scribbled in journals late at night. Words were how I made sense of the world. But after our second child, I gave it up. Because someone had to hold the family together. Someone had to choose stability. And so I became that someone. The days bled into each other. Emails, dishes, laundry, dinner by 6, asleep by 10. And then came Liam. God, Liam. He showed up on a Wednesday afternoon. Sunlight pouring through the living room windows, dust dancing in the air like forgotten memories. He had his camera slung across his shoulder and this boyish, easy smile that made you feel like you'd just stepped into some indie film. He was my son's friend. 26. A freelance photographer. They'd met through a college project, and my son had hired him to digitize old family photos for a school assignment. He walked into our home like he belonged there. Confident, curious. He didn't treat me like a mother. Didn't treat me like someone who had long since faded into the wallpaper. He called me Olivia. Not Mrs. Brooks. Not ma'am. Just Olivia. And I don't know why that hit me as hard as it did. But it did. The first thing he noticed wasn't the photos. It was my old typewriter, covered in dust, tucked in the corner of my home office like a relic from another life. He walked right over to it, ran his fingers across the keys like it meant something. "You used to write, didn't you?" That's what he said. I hadn't told him anything. I hadn't even mentioned it to my son in years. But Liam just saw it, saw me. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. My chest ached. It was like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't even realize had been locked shut. I managed to smile. "Yeah," I said. "A long time ago." He tilted his head. "You still think in stories," he said. "Some people, you can just tell." It was such a simple comment. So casual. But it felt like he'd reached into a part of me I didn't think anyone remembered, and gently said, "I see you. I haven't forgotten who you were." We spent that afternoon going through old photo albums. I watched as he handled each one with care, asking questions that no one else had bothered to ask in years. "Who took this one? Where was this? You look happy here. What was happening that day?" And for the first time in a long, long while, I remembered that I had stories too. Not just the ones I wrote, but the ones I lived. He laughed at things I didn't think were funny anymore. Told me my eyes lit up when I talked about the past. Said I had a voice that sounded like it should be in a podcast or a novel, not buried in a house where no one was really listening. He didn't say it in a flirty way. Not yet. It wasn't that kind of moment. But the air between us, it shifted. Just slightly. Like the first breeze before a summer storm. Nothing too loud, nothing too dramatic. Just present. I remember the way he looked at a photo of me and my husband from our early years. He studied it like it was a painting, then glanced up and asked, "Do you ever miss her?" It took me a second to realize he meant me, the version of me in the photo. And the silence that followed that question said more than any answer I could give. Because I did miss her. I missed the fire, the dreams, the woman who believed in possibilities. And Liam, this boy, no man, who shouldn't have meant anything more than a visitor in my home, was suddenly waking up a part of me that had been asleep for too long. That night, after he left, I stayed up late in my office, staring at the typewriter, running my fingers across those same dusty keys. My husband was snoring in the other room. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to comfort me, but now felt heavy. I didn't write anything that night, but I thought about Liam, about the way he said my name, about the way he saw me, and for the first time in years, I wondered what it might feel like to be wanted again. Not needed, not depended on. Wanted. And, just like that, the seed was planted. Not lust, not romance, but possibility. The kind that changes everything, even if you don't know it yet. At first, I told myself it was harmless. He was just kind, polite, attentive in a way I hadn't felt in years. He smiled when I walked into the room, like he noticed. He laughed at my stories, even the ones I hadn't told out loud in ages. And he listened. Really listened. But then came the pauses. The longer than necessary glances. The way his eyes would linger just a second too long on my mouth when I spoke. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Just wishful thinking. A tired woman misreading things because she missed being seen. But no, it was real. There was something happening. Not out loud, not spoken, but present, thick in the air between us. He started coming around more often. Said there were more boxes of old family photos than he expected, which wasn't a lie, but wasn't the whole truth either. We'd sit together in my home office, knees almost touching, flipping through images of weddings, birthdays, holidays long gone. And somewhere between the laughter and the memories, I started telling him things I hadn't even admitted to myself. About how I used to write every night before bed. About the manuscript I never finished. About the rejection letters I kept in a shoebox under the bed, just in case I ever found the courage to try again. He listened like none of it was silly, like it all mattered. "You should write again," he said one afternoon, handing me a faded photo of me holding my youngest, ink-smudged fingers and a half-eaten apple on the table beside me. "You still have stories to tell." I can feel it. And something inside me stirred. Not the part that wanted him, not yet, but the part that remembered who I used to be before life got in the way. I started dressing a little differently. Nothing bold, I wasn't trying to be obvious. Just more deliberate. I wore colors that made me feel alive again. Lipstick, sometimes. A silk blouse I hadn't touched since before the kids were born. And I noticed that I noticed. Caught my reflection and lingered a little longer than usual. Asked myself quietly, "What are you doing, Olivia?" Because the truth is, I was old enough to be his mother. What was I doing giggling in my kitchen over a man who didn't even flinch when our fingers brushed as we passed a photo back and forth? There was this night. Late. Rain tapping against the windows. My son had asked Liam to drop off a hard drive and hang out. They were supposed to watch a game, I think. But my son got delayed at work, and it was just the two of us. He noticed an old DVD on the shelf. An old classic I used to love. "Want to watch it while we wait?" he asked. So we did. Side by side on the couch. A bowl of popcorn between us. Safe. Comfortable. Until it wasn't. I felt his eyes on me, not in a way that demanded anything, but in a way that saw everything. The fine lines around my mouth, the tired in my eyes, but also the flicker beneath all that. The part of me trying to wake up. At one point in the film, a character says something about settling for a life that feels like a waiting room. I felt that line like a punch to the chest. And maybe he did too, because he turned to me, his voice low, barely more than a whisper, and said, "You deserve more than this quiet sadness, Olivia." I didn't know what to say. I just stared at him. And he didn't try to kiss me. He didn't move. But his words hung there, echoing in the corners of my mind long after the credits rolled. Because he wasn't talking about sex. He wasn't trying to seduce me. He was holding up a mirror, and I couldn't look away. That night, after he left, I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. My husband was already asleep, breathing heavy, back turned. I looked over at him and felt a wave of guilt I couldn't name. Not because I'd done anything wrong, not yet. But because I wanted to. Not to break vows. Not to chase youth. But to feel alive. To feel wanted. To feel like a woman again. Not just a mother. Not just a wife. Me. And when I closed my eyes that night, it wasn't my husband's face I saw. It was Liam's. Looking at me like I was still worth something. And that terrified me. Because you can tell yourself it's innocent. That it's all in your head. Until one day, it isn't. Until one day, you feel it. In your chest. In your fingertips. In the places that haven't felt anything in years. That was the night I stopped lying to myself. And I knew something was coming. Something I wouldn't be able to stop. Even if I wanted to. That night, the rain came hard. Sheets of it beating down like the sky had finally had enough of holding back. The power cut out around 7, just after dinner, just before the house could settle into its usual silence. My husband was out of town for work. My son was at a friend's place. And Liam? He had stayed back to help finish scanning the last of the photos. He offered to leave, but I said no. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe some part of me already knew what I was inviting in when I said, "It's fine. Just help me cover the equipment." So there we were, the two of us in my living room, surrounded by unplugged cords, covered electronics, the soft smell of rain drifting in through an open window. I lit a few candles, more for comfort than anything else. And when I turned around, he was looking at me. Not politely. Not passively. Not the way younger men look at older women out of curiosity or pity. He was looking at me like I was his age. Like time didn't matter. Like he saw something no one had looked hard enough to see in years. I felt the air shift. Heavy. Electric. We sat down across from each other on the floor. No distractions. No screens. No sound except the storm outside, the occasional drip from a leak near the window, and our breathing, quiet, measured, nervous. I don't remember who spoke first. Maybe it was me, asking about his latest photography project. Maybe it was him, complimenting the way candlelight looked on my skin. Or maybe we didn't need words at all. Because the silence between us said everything. Everything I'd been afraid to admit. Everything he'd been trying not to say. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Eyes locked on mine. And then, in a voice that made my stomach twist, he said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." That sentence, it broke me. Because it wasn't just about us. It was about everything. The pretending I'd done for years, pretending to be satisfied, pretending to be fulfilled, pretending that the version of me who had dreams and hunger and joy didn't exist anymore. And there he was, calling it out like it was the simplest truth in the world. He reached out slowly, like he was testing the weight of the moment. His fingers brushed the side of my face, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was so gentle, so deliberate. Like touching me meant something. And I let him. I didn't pull away, didn't flinch. I closed my eyes, just for a second, but that second stretched. And in it, I imagined everything we hadn't yet done. Everything I knew we could never truly have. And then I whispered, "You need to go." It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. A cry from the part of me still trying to protect what little I had left of my life. He looked at me. And in that moment, I saw the fight in him. The desire. The restraint. But then, he nodded. He stood up slowly, gathered his jacket, and walked to the door. No protest. No pressure. Just a lingering glance. And then he was gone. The door closed softly. Too softly. And I sat there in the glow of dying candlelight, the storm still raging outside, feeling like something irreversible had just happened. Not a kiss. Not a touch. Not anything the world could see and judge. But inside me, the dam had cracked. And the silence that followed, it was deafening. Because I knew. I knew from the second he left that we had crossed a line. Not physically, but emotionally, soulfully. I knew that I would never be able to look at him the same way again. And worse, I would never be able to look at myself the same way again either. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body still aching from the tension. My mind on fire with questions I didn't want answered. What was I doing? What was I risking? And why did it feel like, for the first time in years, I was waking up? I told myself it would pass. That it was just a moment. A vulnerable evening. A lapse in judgment I could bury before it became something else. But I was lying. And deep down, I knew it. Because when someone sees you like that, really sees you, you can't unsee them either. You carry it. In your chest. In your breath. In your every quiet denial. That was the night everything changed. The night the foundation of my carefully built life shifted, even if no one else could feel the quake. It would be a while before we touched. Before the line turned into something physical. But emotionally, we were already across it. And there was no going back. Weeks passed. Weeks of silence. No calls. No messages. No accidental run-ins. I tried to convince myself it was over. That it had to be. That I had imagined everything, the connection, the tension, the unspoken promise wrapped in candlelight and storm. But on a Tuesday morning, the kind that blends into every other Tuesday when you're a stay-at-home wife in your 40s, my phone lit up. It was from Liam. Just 6 words. "I miss your stories." That's all. I stared at the screen for a long time. Long enough for the tea beside me to go cold. Long enough for my heart to skip, sink, and soar, all in one breath. I should have deleted it. I should have blocked his number. I should have reminded myself who I was, a married woman, a mother, someone who had no business entertaining affection from a man half a lifetime younger. But I didn't. I texted back. A simple, Foolish, utterly reckless reply. I miss yours too. That was the beginning. Not of an affair in the traditional sense. Not yet. First, we met for coffee. Neutral ground. Broad daylight. Public enough to be innocent. Private enough to let the cracks deepen. We talked, like we always had. Only now, the words sat heavier. Every glance held weight. Every smile lingered. He brought his journal. I brought my notebook. And we started writing. He asked me questions that no one else thought to ask anymore. Why did you stop? What did writing give you that motherhood couldn't? Do you ever miss the woman you were before you gave it all up? And I told him the truth. In ways I hadn't told anyone. Not even my husband. Especially not my husband. It started slow. Almost sacred. We'd meet at the same bookstore cafe on the edge of town. We'd sit in the back corner, sharing pages, notes, memories. I'd laugh more in those stolen hours than I did in weeks at home. It wasn't about sex. Not then. It was about being seen. Being listened to. Being wanted. Not for what I could provide, but for who I actually was. And then, one night, everything changed. My son was staying over at a friend's. My husband was delayed out of town. Liam had dropped by to return a camera lens he had borrowed from my son. I should have thanked him at the door. But instead, I invited him in. We sat on the couch. Talking again. Always talking. But this time, the silences in between our words were louder. His hand found mine. No hesitation. And I didn't pull away. When he leaned in, when his lips touched mine, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. I didn't stop him. I didn't question it. I let it happen, not because I didn't know better, but because for once, I didn't care what the world might say. And when he held me afterward, fully clothed, just arms wrapped around me like I might break, I wept. Silently. Completely. Shamelessly. Because I hadn't been held like that in years. Not out of duty. Not out of habit. But out of need. That night, the line wasn't just crossed. It was shattered. From that point on, we had two lives. My days were still filled with laundry, grocery lists, school emails. But my nights, or stolen afternoons, belonged to him. He knew all the places in town where no one would think to look for me. Quiet parks. Back alley cafes. Abandoned rooftops where we'd sit with coffee and dreams. Our love didn't explode into chaos. It simmered. It whispered. It lived in glances, in journal pages, in fingertips brushing under tables. But lies. Lies grow legs. And I began to tell them without blinking. I'm running errands. I'm seeing an old friend. I just need some alone time. I became a woman I didn't recognize. A woman who checked over her shoulder. Who smiled while hiding fire in her chest. And Liam. He wanted more. He started saying things like, "Why are we hiding? You deserve a love that doesn't live in shadows. No one makes me feel like you do, Olivia." I didn't know what to say. Because I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But I also had a home. A marriage, even if it felt like a ghost of what it once was. A son who still needed me. I told myself we could handle it. That the heart could live in two places at once. That I was in control. But I wasn't. Because every time I came home from Liam's arms, guilt wrapped itself around my throat. The sound of my husband's voice grated on me. The clinking of dinner plates felt hollow. Even my son's laughter felt distant. Like I was watching someone else's life. And yet, I couldn't stop. Because every time I was with Liam, it felt right. And every time I wasn't, the guilt clawed at me like a beast I couldn't tame. I started sleeping less, smiling less, living in fragments. And through it all, Liam remained constant. Gentle, hungry for me, and patient in a way that made it harder, not easier, to walk away. We'd lie side by side, clothes still on, hearts beating against each other like truth we couldn't bury. He once whispered, "I'd wait for you, even if it takes years." And I said nothing, because part of me wanted him to wait. And the other part? Knew I had no right to ask that of him. But love, even the forbidden kind, has a way of making liars out of honest people. And by then, I was lying to everyone, most of all myself. I became a woman I didn't recognize. Not overnight. No, that would have been too obvious. It was gradual, like a slow fade on an old photograph. The version of me who used to hum while folding laundry stopped humming. The woman who once greeted her husband at the door started pretending she hadn't heard him come in. Lying came easier. Avoiding eye contact became a habit. But secrets have a way of leaking out. They start in your gut, then seep into your voice. And, before long, they're staining everything. At first, it was little things. My husband, Robert, started asking questions he hadn't bothered with in years. Where'd you go this afternoon? Why didn't you answer my text? You've been on your phone a lot lately. I shrugged them off, told him I was writing again, reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. Which was technically true. But it was Liam's voice that echoed through every page. Then one night, I came home late. Too late. I had lied about going to a book club, but when I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Robert was sitting in the dark. No TV. No music. Just waiting. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me. Hard. Then he asked, "Is there someone else?" And my heart stopped. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. Laughed like a guilty teenager. Told him he was being paranoid. That I was tired, overworked, craving space. He didn't argue. He just nodded and went upstairs without another word. That silence was worse than any screaming. But that wasn't the worst of it. One evening, I was outside on the back patio. Liam had called just to say he missed me. He always called instead of texting when he really needed to hear my voice. I was smiling, laughing softly, tracing my finger around the rim of my wine glass as he told me about a new photo series he was working on, one he said was inspired by me. Then, I felt it, a presence. I turned, and there was my son, standing in the doorway, watching. He didn't say anything, just walked away. I didn't sleep that night. I laid awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he'd heard, what he knew, what I had done. I was unraveling, piece by piece. Liam, for all his gentleness, had reached his limit. He texted less, stopped initiating calls, and when I finally asked if he was pulling away, he replied, "I can't keep doing this in the shadows, Olivia. Either I mean something, or I don't." I stared at those words for what felt like hours. He was right. He deserved more than stolen time. He deserved a love that didn't require dimmed lights and whispered lies. But what was I supposed to do? I had a marriage, a home, a child who had already seen too much. How do you choose between a man who sees your soul and a life built on duty? Between desire and devotion? Between freedom and the family you swore to protect? The guilt was like a living thing inside me, gnawing at my insides every time I came home to my husband's tired eyes. Every time my son avoided looking at me too long. Every time Liam said, "I love you," and I couldn't say it back, not out loud. I started losing track of the lies. What story I'd told Robert about where I was. What excuse I gave my friends for missing brunch. What day it was. What version of me I had to perform next. I'd smile in the mirror, trying to believe I could still be a good mother, a decent wife, a woman worth loving. But I saw the cracks. God, I saw them everywhere. Even in Liam. He started pulling back, not because he didn't love me, but because he did. And he couldn't keep pretending this wasn't breaking both of us. I remember one moment, just a single, small thing, but it shattered me. Liam had taken me to the coast. Just for the day. He said he wanted to photograph me in natural light, to capture what he called the real Olivia. We stood on a cliff, the sea wind in our hair. And he looked at me like I was everything. I asked, "What do you see when you look at me?" And he said, "A woman fighting to be whole in a world that keeps asking her to be less." That broke me, because I was fighting, and I was losing. That night, back home, I found Robert asleep in his chair. The TV still on. His glasses slipping off the edge of his nose. I looked at him, really looked, for the first time in weeks. This man who had built a life with me, stood by me through childbirth, depression, late-night fights about bills and groceries and school applications. This man who once loved me so loudly and now barely said a word. And I wondered, how did we get here? How did I become a woman who cheats? How did I let someone else carry the pieces of me I should have been brave enough to pick up on my own? I stood in that living room, torn in half. Liam was my fire. But Robert was the foundation. And my son was caught between them both. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was anymore. All I knew was that the lie was no longer something I could hide behind. And the fallout? It had only just begun. The moment I saw the look on Robert's face, I knew I had just broken something I could never fix. It was a Sunday morning. Late. The kind of quiet morning where nothing feels urgent. The kind where the house smells like coffee and toast and old comfort. I came downstairs still in my robe. My hair was a mess. I wasn't expecting anything but small talk and laundry. But there he was, standing in the middle of the living room. Barefoot, pale, and holding something in his hand. A few pages. Typed. My story. The one I thought I had tucked safely away. A short piece I had written, just for me, about a woman rediscovering passion with a younger man. His voice was low, barely a whisper. He said, "Is this him, Liam?" I froze. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I tried to tell him it was fiction, that I was just writing to feel something again. But my hands were shaking, and when he looked at me, really looked at me, I saw the truth settle in his eyes. That quiet collapse of trust. That moment when love doesn't leave, but it backs away slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the pages. He just asked, "How long?" And I crumbled. I told him everything. The texts, the meetings, the rainstorm, the kiss, the lies, the guilt. I told him I was sorry, that I didn't know how it started, only that I had felt invisible for so long. I said, "He saw me, Robert. I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear I didn't." But apologies are useless in the face of betrayal. They just hang there, empty. And then came the sound I'll never forget. My son, on the stairs. He'd heard everything. His face was unreadable, too old for 16, too young for this. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked back up the stairs. Closed his door. I sat on the floor, right there, in the middle of the living room. My knees pulled to my chest, and I sobbed. I broke, and there was no one left to catch me. I tried calling Liam, over and over. No answer. No reply. Eventually, the number stopped ringing. Just went straight to voicemail. Then, nothing. He disappeared. Like smoke. Like he'd never existed. One day, his photography account went dark. Deleted. Vanished. The last post he made was a photo of the ocean, the same day he took me to the cliff. The caption read, "Some stories don't have endings, just exits." That was the last thing I ever heard from him. At home, things didn't return to normal. Not even close. Robert moved into the guest room. We stopped eating dinner together. My son barely looked at me. I had torn through the very foundation of the life I'd built, and what remained was rubble. The affair didn't end with some dramatic confrontation in a hotel room. There was no shouting in the rain. No final kiss. Just quiet destruction. Like watching something sacred sink slowly beneath the surface. You never think one moment, one touch, can shatter everything. But it can. It does. I used to think cheating was about desire. About selfishness. About lust. But the truth? It was about emptiness. about trying to feel alive, about being seen, not just as a mother or a wife, but as a woman. Still, none of that justifies the damage I caused. Not to them. Not to myself. Liam once asked me, "If you could rewrite your story, would you?" And I said no, because pain makes us real. Mistakes remind us that we're human. But now, I'm not so sure. I miss me. I miss the version of myself that believed we could outrun the consequences. But we couldn't. And we didn't. And now, the fallout is all that's left. I didn't just lose Liam. I lost who I was pretending to be, and had to face the question no one ever prepares you for. Who am I when everything I've clung to is gone? Robert moved into the guest room. He never said it directly, but I knew. The bed we once shared now held too many ghosts. My son wouldn't look at me. His silence screamed louder than any argument ever could. It was the kind of hurt that settles into your bones. The kind you can't fix with an apology or a warm breakfast the next morning. I stopped trying to explain myself. Stopped trying to patch holes in a life that had already collapsed. And for the first time in years, I sat with myself. Really sat. In the stillness. In the shame. In the hollow. I started therapy. At first, I didn't even know what to say. I cried more than I spoke. But my therapist, she didn't judge. She just listened. And slowly, she helped me untangle the mess I'd buried deep. We talked about identity. How I'd wrapped mine so tightly around being a wife, a mother, a placeholder. We talked about the hunger, not for sex, but for recognition. To be seen. To matter. To be more than the woman who folded socks and filled grocery lists. She said, "Sometimes we betray others because we've already betrayed ourselves." And that line stuck with me. Because it was true. Long before Liam. I had stopped choosing me. I picked up my journal again. The one with the worn leather cover I'd abandoned years ago. Every night, after the house was quiet, I'd sit at the kitchen table. Pen in hand, glass of wine nearby. And I wrote. I didn't write about Liam. Not at first. I wrote about the girl I used to be. The one who once stayed up all night scribbling poems. Who believed her words could change the world. Who wasn't afraid to feel things too deeply. And then one night I wrote about the storm. The candlelight. The way his fingers grazed my cheek. And how it wasn't desire that unraveled me. It was the feeling of being wanted. Of being seen. There were no texts. No phone calls. No signs from Liam. He was gone. And in that silence, I had to find my own voice again. For a while, I kept hoping he'd come back. Just one message. One apology. Something. But nothing came. And eventually, I stopped waiting. I started doing things for myself. Little things. I read books I'd been meaning to for years. I started walking every morning, headphones in, wind on my face. I rearranged my office, pulled out my old typewriter, and framed the rejection letter from my very first novel. As a reminder that at least I had tried. I cooked dinners that made me happy, even if no one joined me. And I began to look in the mirror again. Not searching for flaws, but trying to remember the woman underneath the wrinkles and regrets. It's strange how rock bottom can feel like the first solid ground you've stood on in years. I stopped being a character in someone else's life, and started becoming the author of my own, not for redemption, not for Robert, not even for my son, but for me, because at the end of it all, after the affair, after the discovery, after the silence, I was still here, broken, but breathing, and maybe, just maybe, becoming whole. They say the hardest part of an affair isn't the ending. It's facing the mirror afterward. And deciding who you're going to be next. It's been 2 years. 2 years since the storm inside me settled enough to clear the sky. I'm here, at a bookstore, signing copies of my first novel, the one I almost didn't write. And then I see him. Liam. Older. A little more worn. But still, that same quiet intensity in his eyes. I catch his gaze before he even realizes I'm here. He smiles, not the reckless, hopeful smile of before, but something softer, more real. I smile back. No words pass between us, just that look. The one that says, we were part of each other's story. And no matter where we go, that chapter will always be there. Some stories don't end with a kiss, or a dramatic confession, or a grand gesture. Some end quietly, with a glance, a breath, a promise to never forget. I turn away, not because I don't care, but because I finally know I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding. I'm not waiting. I'm walking forward. And Liam? He stays where he is. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go. They say closure isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting, making peace with the past, and finally, making room for what's next. I thought I was too old for change, but Liam taught me how to live again. Not because of him, because of what I found inside myself. And that's a story worth telling. Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Have you ever found yourself standing at that blurred line where right and wrong twist into a gray you never expected? Where nothing else matters but the rush of feeling alive again, even if it means risking everything. This was my truth, my cheating confession. Not something I'm proud of, but something I can't deny. Because sometimes the deepest wounds teach us who we really are beneath the surface. And sometimes the greatest betrayal is living a life that isn't truly yours. So I ask you, would you have done the same? Would you risk it all for just one chance to feel alive again? Comment below and share your thoughts. And if you want more stories that go where others won't, stories raw, honest, and unforgettable, subscribe to Cheating Confession Diary. Because sometimes the hardest stories are the ones we need to hear the most. Thank you for listening.